Nnamdi stood in his hut, shaking. His hands clutched his ears, but it did not help. The voice was inside his head. "Uncle, you killed me." He spun around, knocking over a calabash of water. It crashed to the ground. The voice was closer now. "You buried me in the dark, but I can still see you." A cold wind rushed through the hut. The fire in the corner flickered, then went out. Nnamdi backed up, breathing hard. His feet hit something soft. He turned. Ebuka. The boy stood there, his body covered in dirt, his face twisted in pain. His eyes, those lifeless, empty eyes, stared at Nnamdi. "Why, uncle?" Nnamdi screamed. "Now let me backtrack it." Ogboko was an old village, older than anyone could remember. The land had been passed down for generations. It was said that the ancestors blessed it, that anyone who farmed on it would never go hungry. But there was a rule. The land must stay in the family. If it was taken by force, the ancestors would curse the thief. Nnamdi knew this rule. He had heard it since he was a boy. But greed is louder than wisdom. He wanted that land, and he knew there was only one person standing in his way, Ebuka. Ebuka was just 15. He was his dead brother's only son, the rightful heir. The elders had agreed. The land would be his. Nnamdi had smiled and nodded when they said this, but inside he burned with rage. He had worked on that land for years. How could a boy take what should be his? So one night, under the full moon, Nnamdi made a choice. A terrible choice, and now the dead would not let him rest. The night was silent, the kind of silence that makes the skin crawl. The moon hung high, casting long shadows across the land. Nnamdi stood behind a tree, watching. Ebuka sat by the small fire outside his hut. He was roasting maize, humming softly. He had no idea death was coming. Nnamdi's hands tightened around the machete. His breath was slow, steady. He had planned this. No witnesses, no mistakes, just one quick strike. He stepped forward. A twig snapped under his foot. Ebuka turned. "Uncle?" Nnamdi froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He forced a smile. "Ebuka, my son? I was just passing." Ebuka relaxed and nodded. "Come, eat with me." The boy had no fear. He trusted him. Nnamdi stepped closer. The firelight danced on Ebuka's face, his mother's face, his father's face, the family Nnamdi had lost, the family he had envied. His grip on the machete loosened for a moment. Then he thought about the land, the rich soil, the endless harvests. If he did not act now, it would never be his. His eyes darkened. One strike. The machete sliced through the night air. Gasp! Ebuka's hands flew to his neck. Blood poured between his fingers. His eyes, wide, confused, locked onto Nnamdi's. "Ooh, uncle, why?" He fell. The fire crackled. The night swallowed his last breath. Nnamdi stood there, shaking. His hands dripped with warm blood. It was done. He dragged the body to the old well at the edge of the village. No one used it anymore. It was deep, dark, forgotten. He threw Ebuka inside. The sound of the body hitting the bottom echoed in his ears. It was over. Or so he thought. Nnamdi barely slept that night. The weight of what he had done sat heavy on his chest. But in the morning, he put on a straight face. He walked into the village square like nothing had happened. People greeted him. He nodded, smiled. No one suspected anything. Until Ebuka's mother screamed. The village shook with her cry. People ran to her hut. She was on the ground, clutching Ebuka's blanket, wailing. "My son! Where is my son?" Nnamdi stood among the crowd, watching. His stomach twisted, but he did not move. The elders gathered. They questioned everyone. "Did anyone see him last night?" One man spoke up. "I heard voices near his hut. A man's voice." Nnamdi's breath caught in his throat. Another woman added, "Yes, but I thought it was his uncle. He visits him sometimes." All eyes turned to Nnamdi. His heart pounded. He forced a frown, shook his head. "I don't know anything. I was in my hut all night." The elders stared at him. The air was thick with suspicion, but no one had proof. For now, he was safe. At night, he lay on his mat, listening. Every small noise made his skin prickle. The wind howled through the trees, the crickets sang, then a whisper. "Uncle." His body stiffened. "Uncle, I am here." His breath came in sharp gasps. He sat up, eyes darting around the hut. The fire burned low. Shadows danced on the walls. Then a shadow moved, Not from the fire, from the corner. Something stood there. Two pale eyes stared at him. Nnamdi opened his mouth to scream. The hut went dark. Nnamdi woke up gasping for air. The hut was quiet, but his skin was cold with sweat. He looked around, heart racing. Nothing. Had it been a dream? He rubbed his face and exhaled. Maybe it was just guilt. Maybe it would pass. But it didn't. The next morning, strange things began to happen. Nnamdi went to his farm, ready to tend to his crops. He had always been proud of his land, lush, green, full of life. But what he saw made his stomach drop. The crops were dying. The leaves were turning yellow. The stems were weak, breaking under his touch. This is not possible, he muttered. He dug his fingers into the soil. It was dry, too dry, like the land had given up. A farmer passing by stopped. Nnamdi, what happened to your farm? Nnamdi forced a laugh. Just a bad season. The rain will come. The farmer shook his head. The other farms are fine. Only yours is like this. A cold chill ran down Nnamdi's spine. Later that day, his troubles grew worse. His goat, strong and healthy the day before, lay dead near the hut. Its eyes were open, staring into nothing. Flies swarmed its body. The villagers gathered. This is not normal, an old woman whispered. Maybe he has angered the spirits, another said. Nnamdi clenched his fists. Enough! Go back to your homes. The people scattered, whispering among themselves. That night, as he lay in bed, the whisper came again. Uncle, did you think it was over? A gust of wind rushed through the hut. The fire went out. The whispers grew louder. Nnamdi covered his ears. Go away, he screamed. Laughter, cold, bitter laughter. Then silence. Nnamdi did not sleep that night. The sun rose, but Nnamdi felt no warmth. He had not slept. His eyes were red, his hands shaky. He stepped outside, hoping for peace, but the village was watching him. People whispered as he walked past. Some pointed. Others shook their heads. He clenched his jaw. What are they saying? He muttered. Then he heard it. Ebuka spoke to me, an old man said. In my dream. Nnamdi froze. Another woman nodded. Me too. He stood at the foot of my bed, his eyes empty. He said, tell them, my uncle killed me. Gasps filled the air. More people stepped forward. He came to me as well. And me! Nnamdi's head spun. This could not be happening. A young boy stepped forward. His voice was shaky. He told me where he is. The crowd murmured. Nnamdi's breath caught. Where? He asked, his voice tight. The boy swallowed. The well. A heavy silence fell. Then movement. The villagers turned and began walking, first slowly, then faster, toward the well. Nnamdi's heart pounded. His feet felt stuck to the ground. No, 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 no. He ran after them. Wait, you are listening to dreams? This is madness, he shouted. But no one listened. They reached the well. The old, forgotten well. The one he had thrown Ebuka into. An elder stepped forward. We must look inside. A young man brought a rope. Another tied a lantern to it. Nnamdi's throat went dry as they lowered it down. Seconds passed. Then a scream. The lantern was pulled up. The villagers gasped. There in the dim glow lay a body. Ebuka. His skin was pale, his mouth slightly open, his empty eyes staring up. Nnamdi stumbled back. The whispers turned to shouts. You killed him! Murderer! Hands grabbed him. He struggled, but they held tight. The village knew, and now they wanted justice. Nnamdi thrashed in their grip. Let me go, he shouted, his voice wild with fear. But the villagers were not listening. Hands dragged him through the dust. Angry voices filled the air. Murderer! Kill him like he killed the boy. Let the ancestors judge him. They dragged him to the village square, to the feet of the elders. The oldest of them, Obi, sat on a wooden stool, his face carved with deep lines of wisdom. His piercing eyes studied Nnamdi in silence. Speak, Obi finally said. His voice was calm, but it held the weight of thunder. Did you kill your nephew? Nnamdi's breath came in quick gasps. No, I did not. This is all lies, ghost stories. The crowd roared. Liar! His spirit spoke to us. Obi raised a hand. The crowd fell silent. Then he turned to the villagers. Tell me, how did you know where to find the body? A woman stepped forward. Ebuka came to us in our dreams. That he showed us the well. The elders exchanged glances. Murmurs passed between them. Then Obi spoke again. Nnamdi, you are innocent, you have nothing to fear. We will let the gods decide. Nnamdi's stomach twisted. What do you mean? Obi pointed toward the shrine. You will take the oath of truth. If you lie, the gods will strike you down. Nnamdi's hands went cold. The oath of truth was not a game. It was an ancient ritual. If a man swore falsely, strange things happened. Some fell sick, some lost their minds, some died in their sleep. The shrine stood at the edge of the village, an old mud structure covered in palm fronds. Smoke curled from inside, carrying the scent of burning herbs. The villagers marched Nnamdi toward it. His feet dragged against the dirt. His mind raced. This could not be happening. The priestess, Mama Ugo, stood at the entrance. She was old, her back slightly bent, but her eyes were sharp, too sharp. They seemed to see inside him. She raised her staff. Who comes before the gods? The crowd shouted as one, Nnamdi, the murderer! Nnamdi's heart pounded. He opened his mouth to protest, but Mama Ugo's gaze pinned him in place. She pointed to the sacred stool in the middle of the shrine. Sit! He hesitated. The villagers pushed him forward. He had no choice. Mama Ugo lifted a small black pot. Inside was a thick, dark liquid, the oath drink. It was made from sacred leaves, believed to reveal guilt. She stirred it slowly. And speak only the truth. If you lie, the gods will know. Nnamdi swallowed hard. His hands trembled as he took the pot. The liquid smelled bitter, like rotting wood. His mind screamed at him to run. But the villagers blocked every path. He had to do this. He raised the pot to his lips and drank. It burned. His throat tightened. His stomach twisted. The world around him spun. Mama Ugo's voice rang in his ears. Now, Nnamdi, tell us, did you kill Ebuka? All eyes were on him. It poured down his face. His tongue felt heavy. He opened his mouth, and a cold hand grabbed his shoulder. His blood froze. A voice whispered against his ear. Tell the truth, uncle. The villagers gasped. Some stepped back. Nnamdi turned his head slowly. Ebuka stood behind him. His dead eyes stared deep into Nnamdi's soul. Nnamdi tried to scream, but no sound came out. His body stiffened. His lips trembled. Ebuka stood behind him, just as he had seen in his nightmares. His skin was pale, his clothes covered in dirt. His neck, where the machete had struck, was dark with dried blood. The villagers gasped. Some fell to their knees. Others ran back, whispering prayers. Mama Ugo did not move. She only watched. Ebuka's dead lips parted. His voice was cold, hollow. Uncle, why did you kill me? Brian fell silent. Even the wind stopped. Nnamdi shook his head violently. No, this is not real. This is not real. His voice cracked. Mama Ugo stepped closer. The spirits do not lie, Nnamdi. Her voice was calm but heavy. The dead have spoken. Tell us the truth. The villagers stared at him, their eyes wide with horror and anger. His hands clenched into fists. He had to deny it. He had to. But then, Ebuka moved closer. His cold fingers touched Nnamdi's arm. Nnamdi felt it. His skin burned like fire. A sharp pain shot through his chest. His knees buckled. Confess, the boy whispered. Tears streamed down Nnamdi's face. He could not fight it anymore. His body shook as the truth ripped out of him. I killed him, he choked. His voice was barely a whisper. The villagers gasped. Some shouted. Others wept. I did it for the land, Nnamdi sobbed. I thought it should be mine. I thought no one would know. Mama Ugo's face darkened. She turned to the elders. The curse will not lift until justice is done. Obi nodded. His voice was grim. Then justice will be done. The crowd roared. Nnamdi's fate was sealed. The village square was filled with firelight and angry voices. The entire village had gathered. Men, women, even small children. They all wanted the same thing, justice. Nnamdi knelt in the dirt, his hands tied behind his back. His face was wet with sweat and tears. His body shook. He could barely breathe. Obi, the eldest of the council, stood before him. His voice was loud, firm. You have confessed before the gods, before the spirits, and before us all. You have killed your own blood for greed. The crowd shouted, Let him die! Throw him in the well like he did to the boy. Let the ancestors deal with him. Nnamdi's heart pounded. His head spun. Please, have mercy, he begged. was blinded by greed. Mama Ugo raised her staff. There is no mercy for those who kill their own blood. Her voice was like thunder. The land cursed you the moment you took that life. Until justice is done, the curse will not break. The villagers murmured. Some nodded. The curse, it is real. The crops are dying. Our animals are falling sick. Obi stepped forward. The ancestors demand balance. He turned to the people. What shall be done? The crowd roared back. Death! Nnamdi's chest tightened. His vision blurred. No, no, please. He struggled against the ropes, but they held tight. Mama Ugo's eyes locked onto him. You will die at sunrise. The villagers cheered. Nnamdi screamed, but nothing could save him now. The villagers dragged Nnamdi to a small hut at the edge of the village. It was dark, cold, empty. They threw him inside and shut the wooden door. His body hit the ground hard. His wrists were still tied behind him. He groaned, rolling onto his side. His breath came in short gasps. Tomorrow, he would die. His mind raced. How had it come to this? He had thought he was clever. He had thought no one would ever know. But the dead do not stay quiet. He turned his head. The hut was pitch black. Only the sound of crickets filled the night. Then, a whisper. His body went stiff. Nnamdi. His blood ran cold. The voice came from the corner. Soft, familiar. He squeezed his eyes shut. Go away, he whispered. A gust of wind rushed through the hut, though there were no windows. Cold fingers touched his cheek. Nnamdi jerked away, his breath catching in his throat. No, no, please. Ebuka's voice was close now, right by his ear. You took my life, and now you will pay. Nnamdi began to sob. I am sorry. I was greedy. I did not think. Ebuka's whisper turned to a low, bitter laugh. The ancestors have judged you. Nnamdi felt the air grow heavier. The shadows moved around him. His chest tightened like something unseen was squeezing the life from him. He gasped, struggling to breathe. His pulse pounded in his ears. The whispers grew louder. Voices. Many voices. Not just Ebuka's. The spirits of the land had come, and they were waiting for sunrise. The first light of dawn touched the village. A heavy silence filled the air. The villagers gathered in the square, their faces grim. The elders sat in a circle, waiting. The execution ground was ready. Two strong men yanked Nnamdi from the hut. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He had not slept. He had barely breathed. The whispers had not stopped. Even now, he could hear them. Ebuka, the ancestors, the spirits of the land. They were waiting, watching. The men dragged him to the center of the square. The ground beneath him felt like fire. His legs were weak, but he did not struggle. There was no use. Obi stood before him. His voice was deep, steady. Nnamdi, son of Ekena, you took a life that was not yours to take. The land cursed you. The ancestors demand justice. The villagers murmured. Some nodded. Others spat at the ground near him. Mama Ugo stepped forward. She raised a small bowl filled with white chalk and dipped her fingers inside. She drew a mark on Nnamdi's forehead. Mark of death. You will leave this world as you took Ebuka from it, she said. Nnamdi's lips trembled. His body shook. Please, please, mercy. But no one listened. Two men grabbed him, forced him to his knees. A sharp blade gleamed in the morning light. Nnamdi gasped. The whispers in his ears grew louder. Then, soft, mocking, Ebuka was watching. The blade rose. The villagers held their breath. The sun climbed higher. And then a scream, not from Nnamdi, from the sky. The wind howled. Dust swirled. A force unseen rushed through the square, knocking people back. The spirits had come, and they were not done. The wind roared like 1,000 voices crying at once. The villagers screamed as dust and leaves whipped through the air. The elders stumbled back. The executioner dropped his blade. Nnamdi gasped, his body trembling. He felt them, the spirits. They were everywhere. Mama Ugo gripped her staff, her eyes wide. The ancestors are here, she whispered. The ground trembled beneath them. The villagers fell to their knees, covering their faces. Then a voice, not one, not two, many, ancient, angry. You have taken a life. You have disturbed the balance. You must suffer. Nnamdi's breath hitched. He fell forward, his forehead touching the dirt. Please, please, I am sorry. His voice cracked. Forgive me. But the spirits did not listen. A shadow rose from the dust. It took shape. Tall, dark, shifting like smoke. The face was hollow, but its eyes burned. It pointed at Nnamdi. The land will not take him so easily, the spirit declared. He must feel what he has done. Nnamdi's body jerked. His veins burned like fire. His mouth opened in a silent scream. His fingers curled, his back arched. Then his skin began to change. Dark veins spread across his arms. His fingers twisted, gnarled like roots. His breath came in ragged gasps. The villagers watched in horror. Mama Ugo's eyes darkened. The spirits have cursed him, she said. The elders nodded solemnly. He will not die, Obi said. Not yet. The spirits wanted him to suffer, to feel the pain of the land, to feel what Ebuka felt. And as Nnamdi's body twisted in agony, the villagers knew this was only the beginning. Nnamdi collapsed onto the ground, his body shaking. His skin had darkened, veins thick and pulsing beneath it. His fingers were stiff, curling like the roots of a dying tree. He gasped for air, but his throat felt tight, like invisible hands were squeezing him. The villagers watched in stunned silence. Some stepped back, afraid. Mama Ugo's voice was calm but heavy. The spirits have decided. Nnamdi lifted his head, his eyes wide with terror. Please, let me die, he croaked. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Mama Ugo shook her head. Death is mercy. The ancestors do not give mercy to betrayers. The villagers murmured. The curse will stay with him. He will wander, suffering. Obi stepped forward. His face was grim. Nnamdi, you will not die today. You will not die tomorrow. The land has marked you. Nnamdi's breath came in short gasps. No, no, his voice cracked. Please. Obi ignored him. He turned to the crowd. From this day, he is no longer one of us. His voice was like stone. He will walk alone. He will eat nothing from the land. No hut will shelter him. No hand will help him. The villagers nodded. Mama Ugo raised her staff. He will feel what Ebuka felt. He will know hunger, pain, and fear. And when the ancestors are ready, her eyes darkened. They will take him. Nnamdi's body sagged. His heart pounded. The whispers in his ears did not stop. They would never stop. The villagers turned away. One by one, they left him there, alone, cursed. And as the sun rose higher, Nnamdi realized his suffering had only just begun. The village returned to life. People went back to their homes. The market reopened. The children laughed again. But Nnamdi did not belong anymore. He wandered the outskirts, his body weak, his stomach empty. He tried to drink from the stream, but the water burned his throat. He tried to pluck fruits, but they rotted in his hands. The land rejected him. At night, the whispers grew louder. Ebuka's voice, the ancestors, the spirits. They did not let him sleep. They did not let him rest. You will suffer. You will know what you have done. His body wasted away, but he did not die. The curse would not let him. Days passed, then weeks. The villagers saw him sometimes, lurking in the shadows, his body thin, his skin gray. The children whispered stories. The ghost man, the walking curse. No one spoke to him. No one gave him food. He was nothing. One night he stood outside the village, watching from the trees. He saw the warm glow of fires. He heard the laughter of families. A tear slid down his cheek. He had taken a life for greed, and now he had lost everything. Then a cold wind blew. The whispers stopped. For the first time in weeks, there was silence. Nnamdi turned. Ebuka stood there, his pale face, his hollow eyes. But this time he was smiling. Time. Nnamdi's breath caught. His body felt light, his vision blurred. The ground beneath him seemed to disappear. And then he was gone. The next morning, the villagers gathered at the square. The air was still. No birds sang. Even the wind refused to blow. Something had changed. A young boy ran into the village, panting. He is gone, he shouted. The elders stepped forward. Obi's face was grim. Who is gone? The boy swallowed. Nnamdi. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some gasped, others whispered. Mama Ugo's eyes darkened. Where did you see him last? The boy pointed toward the cursed land, the land Nnamdi had killed for. The villagers followed. They reached the clearing. The The soil was dry and cracked, the trees bent as if whispering secrets. The well where Nnamdi had thrown Ebuka's body stood in the center, and there, by the well, lay Nnamdi's clothes. But his body was gone. No footprints, no blood, nothing. Just silence. Mama Ugo closed her eyes. The ancestors have taken him. A deep hush fell over the crowd. Obi nodded. His voice was heavy. The curse is lifted. The villagers looked around. The air felt different. The soil, once dead, now seemed to breathe. Then a woman gasped. She pointed at the land. Look, the crops, dry and dying for months, were turning green. The village stared in awe. The land was healing. The curse was truly over. That night, they lit fires. They sang songs of the ancestors. They told stories of justice. And as the flames flickered, some swore they saw a figure standing near the trees. A boy, his pale face, his hollow eyes, watching. Ebuka had found peace. But Nnamdi? No one ever saw him again. No one ever spoke his name. And on quiet nights when the wind blew just right, the villagers could still hear the whispers. This story teaches us a powerful lesson. Greed and evil never go unpunished. Nnamdi wanted land that did not belong to him, and he was willing to kill his own nephew to get it. But in the end, the land rejected him. The spirits cursed him, and he lost everything. We must remember, what we take by force will never bring us peace. When we harm others for our own gain, we are digging our own graves. Justice will always find us, no matter how long it takes. Ebuka's spirit did not rest until the truth was revealed. And in the end, Nnamdi did not just lose his land, he lost his soul. Advice to my listeners: let this story be a warning to all of us. Do not let greed control your heart. Do not harm others for your own gain. No matter how much you think you can hide your wrongdoings, the truth will always come out. The ancestors are watching. Live a good life. Treat people with kindness. And remember, the land knows, the spirits know, and one day, justice will come. Don't forget to subscribe. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more thrilling, dramatic, and powerful stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Like this video. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss out on the next story. More exciting and mysterious stories are coming your way. Stay tuned